Please welcome to the stage Congresswoman Mariannette Miller-Meeks, a Republican from Iowa, doctor, and member of the House Energy and Commerce Subcommittee on Health.
Congresswoman, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Dr. Meeks. Well, first, your reaction to what you heard from your colleague a moment ago.
I have interacted with Representative Peters on a number of occasions, and I agree with some of the things he said, and I disagree with some of the things he said. From my standpoint, no, I am not going to try to repeal the ACA. Representative Peters, you heard that from me, and we also know I have no influence within my conference because I've taken on my leadership maybe on one too many occasions, which is why I had a robust primary. But there are some things I agree with and some things I disagree with. I'm very concerned about the impact of the IRA on drug innovation, drug development. So it's interesting to talk about the need, desire for innovation in the United States, how well we do things, but at the same point in time, put forward and vote for and support a bill that can crush that innovation. And that's not just here in the United States. I've actually traveled abroad and was shocked when I had companies come and talk to me about the impact of the IRA on them, on foreign countries who do have a market in the United States.
So how do you strike that balance? Because you're right, we are innovators when it comes to drugs and pharmaceutical research. We are leading the world, and yet prices are high. So how do you get to that equilibrium?
Well, one of the things you do is start looking at the whole supply chain and where those costs are and where there's value. So one of the things that I've done is and I think Rep. Peters has also been very helpful on this front, is looking at the PBMs and looking at the whole marketplace and the supply chain. So my desire is not to end pharmacy benefit managers or PBMs, but certainly when you look at the marketplace from a pharmaceutical company that has the research, the development, then the clinical trials, then FDA approval, to go through that entire process and the capital investment it takes to get there, then to get a drug to the market. And then you look at the PBMs, which are this opaque intermediary, middleman, and what value do they bring? And there is some value. Are they inflating drug prices, which they are? I thought that we would get PBM reform earlier, but we've got a couple of bills on that. So one of them is the Drug Act. But from the patient standpoint, so I look at this from both ends. One is the congressional hat and what we do in the budget, what we do on cost, what we do on making sure people have the newest medications, the newest types of medications, and I think Rep. Peters mentioned biologics, so biologics or immunotherapy or gene-guided medications, all of those are going to cost vastly more than the antibiotics that we started with 60, 70 years ago. And so the congressional hat, but then the doctor-patient hat is, how do you get cures to individuals? How do you get medications in people's hands, and how much are they paying for that? So I think that there is reform we can do, and one of the big criticisms I had with the IRA is, although it's claimed to be bipartisan, there was no Republican input. And I think one of the things both parties should learn is to put forth huge policy changes, huge programmatic changes. It's best done with input from both major parties, and they're more long-lasting. So I think that's one of the things that I don't agree with Medicare price negotiations. If you'll think back to Medicare Part D, when our federal government and taxpayer dollars went to pay for drugs that was not part of the Medicare program, people didn't contribute or put into the Medicare program for drug coverage, so that this was added. One of the benefits of the way that Medicare Part D was done, i.e. money going to the patient rather than money going to another entity or a third-party payment, was, if you'll go back and look at what happened immediately after it passed was that Walmart offered $4 generic drugs. That was an immediate impact. Now, they wanted to do, our currently minority party, but the Democrats wanted Medicare price negotiation in Medicare Part D, and it didn't happen. But what did happen was much more powerful, and that is money in the hands of individuals, money in the hands of patients, then looking at where their drugs are, where they get their drugs, how they get their drugs, So Walmart started it, and it was followed by everybody else. And that was hugely powerful in reducing patients' out-of-pocket costs.
But why not have the federal government at least have a role in that process of negotiating drug prices?
Because I think what happens is that they artificially set a level when if you had market-based competition, you may have that pricing lower. And the other thing is, in both, you said this in your last time period, was that it has already had a dampening effect upon, what's being developed, what's being innovated, what's being produced. In addition to which, I've had work where I've had individuals that are getting their medications from the VA. The VA restricts the formulary, and so I may want to, as a physician, in concert with my patient, discussing with them, want them on a particular medication, have them stable and compliant on a particular medication, but the VA changes the formulary and restricts what access to medications they have. So, and especially in rural areas. So I have a district that is both urban and rural, but I mean, I can go 400 to 600 miles in a day when I'm traveling my district. It's that far apart and that disparate. And so, having those, type of medication, what the impact is, those are part of the IRA. And we have yet also to see what the ramifications will be. So part of this is conjecture, but I can also say the concerns I had with the ACA, have been realized.
But let me go back. You answered part of my next question, which is access in rural areas. Geographically, your district is how many miles? Roughly?
Oh my gosh, I don't even know. It's all of southeast Iowa. I do it by hours I'm on the road.
So when you're on the road, when you're talking to those people in the more rural areas, what are the biggest challenges that we're facing in terms of access, not only to health care, which is a big issue, but also to the drugs that they need?
Twofold, and one is that because of the increase of the PBMs or pharmacy benefit managers in the supply chain of medications, and the fact that they restrict drugs that are coming onto the formulary or a certain tier, you have 80% of medications now come through the PBM marketplace, which typically mails drugs. They also reimburse a pharmacy or an independent pharmacy for a medication, often at a cost or a price that's lower than it takes that pharmacy. So what's happened is that small independent pharmacies are closing. They'll have clawbacks, so they'll have been paid for a medication, then the PBM will claw back what they paid. So they're ending up underwater. So as these small independent pharmacies close, you don't have access to medication. So maybe sometimes you can wait a week to get a medication in the mail, but often you cannot. So if it's the evening, or if this is the weekend, or what about a cancer drug? That your oncologist, you've seen the oncologist, they prescribe or they make a change. You don't have access to that medication until it comes later. And we're actually trying to address some of those things in legislation. And we have two pharmacists, Representative Harshberger and Representative Buddy Carter, both of who are working on that issue as well too. So access becomes a problem and an issue. The other problem with mailing drugs, and I dealt with this with my mother had Alzheimer's, and so the last 6-7 years of her life, I would drive back and forth between Iowa and Oklahoma to prepare all of her medications. And in concert with her doctor, there were some medications I discussed with her doctor if she needed to be on them, and some not. I would still get 3 months supply of medication long after she was taken, and it's a waste of all that medication, a waste of money in the system, and no one even talks about it.
Why 3 months?
Because typically a PBM or a mail drug will send people a 3-month supply, 90-day supply of their medications.
As a doctor and as a daughter, what did that experience teach you about your mother's care, the drugs that she received, and how it was administered?
Oh, that's a great question. I can just say I understand very intimately the frustration people have with getting drugs through the mail, getting them canceled, getting them sent back, taking care, and sometimes medications that are left over are narcotics, how to dispense of them, what's the proper way to dispense of them, and then just the frustration of, how many times did I have to call, and in this particular case it was TRICARE, and I'm not knocking one individual company, this is across the spectrum. How many times do I have to call? And I have some knowledge of the healthcare system. So if you have no knowledge of the healthcare system and you're helping take care of a child or an elderly parent or an adult, does not have the capacity to care for themselves. And you may be working and taking care of your own family. The amount of time you're spending on the phone or writing letters to correct things, and you're trying to be conscientious because we are all paying this cost. This is a shared cost that we all have. And so you're trying to be conscientious, you're trying to save money to the system so that there is money for newer drugs, innovative drugs, immunosuppressive drugs that are biologically or individually chromosomally genetically based, because that's where the new cost is going to be. That's where the major cost is going to be. So it's very frustrating. And so I certainly understand people's concern, what they go through, but it's also what makes me such a passionate advocate for PBM reform and helping to lower that cost and helping to keep our small individual community pharmacies in place, because they're there, they consult, they do other things, they deliver drugs for people, when they saw their doctor, they need a drug the next day or that day, and they add value.
Well, you know this, but my wife is a nurse, but as an advocate for your mom, you need somebody to be an advocate when you have somebody who is in declining health, who needs the drugs, because without an advocate, you get lost in a very bureaucratic system. Speaking of bureaucracy, you mentioned something earlier. We could spend the next 5 hours talking about Congress and the lack of bipartisanship and how the system is broken. On this issue in particular, it is a bipartisan issue because healthcare affects all of us. So how do we get to the point of reaching some consensus on drug prices, on healthcare in general, and on legislation that both sides can agree to? Not necessarily this year, but certainly in the next Congress, regardless of who's president and regardless of who controls the House and the Senate.
Well, I think first is you start with the little things. So you start where you have consensus and where you can agree on things. The other thing that I think is important is for members to be together. So whether it is on, we did it, Energy and Commerce, this was international, but the Energy and Commerce Committee last year went to COP, the UN Climate Summit. And it was good, and it was bipartisan. It was good for us to go as a bipartisan group of individuals. So whether you have, small forays, small trips to go visit a nuclear power plant or to go visit a drug manufacturing, those, or when we went to the strategic national stockpile. So those, forays, those interactions with members outside of the halls of Congress, in a setting where there's not as much pressure, I think is very helpful for us to be able to get together, talk about things. And you don't even have to talk about bills or legislation. You just talk to one another as human beings. And I think those things are very helpful. We have, I wouldn't say that there was always bipartisanship on PBM reform, but it certainly has turned into that. When I came to Congress in 2021, sworn in January 2021, I started talking about PBM reform, found allies and Representative Carter and Representative Harshberger who also wanted to do that. But I can tell you, in talking to Representative Carter, this has been something that he's been at for over a decade. And so, utilizing that knowledge and expertise that each one of us bring to the table, all from a different circumstance. As you heard from Rep. Peters, because he has entities in his district. And so it's important to his district, it's important to the constituents he served. He brings a certain, value, certain knowledge and expertise that those of us that don't have those type of companies in our district. So I think more conversation, more talking, more willingness to engage, and then members being together where they can see each other as individuals, as human beings, not part of a party. And then there's a whole lot of other stuff beyond that that I'm not going to get into. So,
but two final quick points. I talked to Senator Bill Cassidy about this issue. He's a doctor. Who are the advocates? Who do you look for in the House and the Senate that have the medical background to address these issues?
I think that we've found, when we go to look at bills, so we have, kids accelerating access to care, in the Medicaid improvement. So we actually look at both other physicians. So you have Dr. Barrow, Dr. Ruiz, Dr. Sherrill, and then other people that are advocates. So you search out those, you find people that you can work with. They'll ask you about being on a bill. You'll ask them about being on a bill. So then you learn as you're in Congress, those individuals who you think that you can work with, and also individuals that you can trust. Part of this is trust. When someone says they're going to be on a bill and they're going to co-sponsor a bill, then do they turn around and then vote against the bill in committee? So you learn
That
those.
would never happen.
I've never done that, but I'm way too candid. And I have no poker face, so people usually know if I support or don't support something. Those things you learn with time and being in Congress. And then you talk to other people that are also in that space and can help you to say, this person might be, amenable to this. So you learn who to work with and who to avoid.
Final question, 30 seconds. The next panel is coming up. The future of drug prices is what? Same question I gave Congressman Peters.
First and foremost, PBM reform. I think that has, to do PBM reform, our drug pricing bill, our drug bill on spread pricing, that bill alone would save our government $636 million, and it would immediately have an effect of lowering prices for individuals.
Congresswoman, thank you very much. You're going back to your district this weekend?
I'm going back to my district this weekend.
Safe travels. Thank you.
Thank you.